This interview was made possible in part by a grant from Arts DFW.
Hi, we're here at the Amon Carter Museum in Fort Worth to talk with curator Shirley Reece-Hughes about the exhibition, The World Outside, Louise Nevelson at Midcentury. Hi Shirley, thanks for speaking with us today.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
So to start with, I just wanted to touch back on something that you mentioned in the exhibition catalog about how the exhibition idea really emerged from when you were researching Nevelson's work in the collection. Can you elaborate a little bit on how collections research develops into an exhibition?
Yeah, the Carter is unique in that in the 1960s we were collecting Tamarind lithography prints, and Nevelson at that time was not known for her sculpture. And so these lithographs that we have her full collection of 1967 prints. She actually went to Tamarind twice, once in 1963 and again in 1967, were unique, and I had an opportunity to really look at those because they had been on view years before. But the other interesting aspect to the Carter is we have collected in depth, and Ruth Carter Stevenson was interested in Nevelson, and so we have sculptures from three major phases of her career, including an early abstract plaster work from the 1930s, and then another work in ceramic from the 1940s, and then one of her signature wall works titled Lunar Landscape. So in each of these objects, I noticed how Nevelson was experimental. She tried techniques that weren't typical or conventional at the time in which she made them. So that really interested me in delving deeper into her life and career.
What Nevelson, like you mentioned, at the time when the Amon Carter was collecting, she wasn't real known for her sculptures, but now that's what she's most well known for. But this exhibition highlights all the various mediums, something that you just touched on. Can you elaborate a little bit further on the types of media that she worked in that we can see in the show?
Yeah, so Nevelson started out, like many artists, studying at the Art Students League and also with Hans Hofmann in Germany. And so she created drawings in the 1930s, and at that moment, Surrealism was very popular. And studying with Hans Hofmann, he was teaching her the principles of Cubism. And so we have these rare 1930s drawings that are not like classical life drawings. They're life drawings, but the figures are so unique and so different. They contort and compress, and she's upended a medium that was more traditional and classical, but that was Nevelson. She was often experimental. And then those drawings reflected her experience with the show goes into her study of modern dance and her interest in the body, her lifelong interest in the body and movement, and how that inspired her spontaneity. And then we also have etchings that she did from her stay at Atelier 17, which was a radical, innovative etching studio. And that was her first experiment with printmaking. And within these etchings, she's exploring the body, but she's also, once again, trying different techniques. She even used a can opener at times to draw lines on the plate, which was an untried method at the time. And so that, and visitors, I think, will see the connection, the idea of carving into the etching plate. She was looking at the way that she was working, and she had been working in sculpture in more of a subtractive method. But she moved to an additive method after the etchings and created one of her first boxes that we have on view, and that idea of the shadow box and that play of light and shadow that you see in her prints and then moves to her sculpture. And then the different ways in which she worked in wood. Wood became her medium from then on. The different ways she worked with wood. She's known for her signature wall works, but she also created freestanding columns and tabletop landscapes. and wall-mounted pieces. And so that's shown in the exhibition, and then also her tamarind lithographs and how she made aesthetic breakthroughs after working in that type of printmaking medium. And I think visitors can see the connections between what she created there and then how she moved on with her sculptures after that experience.
Yeah, it's really great to see all the different connections when you see all the work together, the different types of medium. And like you mentioned, like her media was really quite diverse, but she seemed to have worked in a pretty limited color palette. Like for the wooden sculptures, it was basically black, white, and gold.
Yes.
And some of the prints, we see a little bit of red. Can you talk about, was there a reason for this?
Yeah, she believed in monochromatic in a way that she thought it, as she said, black to her contained all color. And most of her sculpture is done in black. And it was a way to unify the diverse objects she used. So she was in the 50s going out to the street and picking up wood from litter piles. So it was a variety of different kinds of woods. It could be mahogany, it could be oak. And so painting these objects in monochromatic colors was a way to unify the pieces. But she was concerned with each of her walls, each box is unique. It's like a work of art in itself. It's an assemblage that she hand created. And by creating the monochromatic palette, she creates a sense of illusionism in her sculpture that really wasn't being done at the time. We think of massive welded metal sculpture, which was popular at that moment, and that's more three-dimensional blocky. And with her boxes, there's recession. And so visitors can peer into it. And so the monochromatic color unified the diversity of the objects, but then created a different kind of space and dimension that viewers could look at.
Her prints, a lot of them are still monochromatic, but there's a few that have the red and the black together and some grays. How does that kind of carry over to this idea of like her monochromatic way in which she did the sculpture?
Well, her prints are, like her 1963 tamarind prints are primarily black and white, and she was innovative with those because she used fabric and she used white lace. So that black and white, that drama, I think she liked to create. But she also loved to play with and use shadow. So by using monochromatic colors in her sculptures or in her prints, she could play with the idea of shadow more, the play of light and black, or white and black, or light and dark. In her tamarind lithograph, she worked in a modular way, in the same way that she did with her assemblages, where she organized different sheets. So red created a different reverberation, a different type of looking. And Nevelson was really interested in the power of visual effects. And so red was experimental for her. We don't see it again in her oeuvre. There may be something, but I haven't seen it. So it was very unique at the time.
So as the world implies, like the exhibition title, that a lot of her artworks were inspired by things outside of like her personal kind of sphere, and she was really interested in community. So you mentioned dance, and then she also had influences from Maya culture. What are some of the artworks that we should look for that really best illustrate those connections?
Well, the community idea is reflected in the works behind us. This was part of a installation created, Dawn's Wedding Feast, in 1959. That was the title of the entire installation. These are parts of it. That she created for the Museum of Modern Art. And it was a celebration, the idea of marriage and community. It was an important moment for her. Nevelson had finally received recognition in 1958, the year before, for her Moon Garden +1 exhibition that was all black matte sculptures. And she wanted to try something different and introduce white into her oeuvre. And at the time, she went back to Rockland, Maine. Nevelson grew up in Rockland, Maine, and as a Jewish immigrant, she often felt like an outsider. And the white is reminiscent of the colonial stately houses that in some ways she intuited her differences from. It was kind of the upper echelon of the society, and she intuited the differences almost from her perspective of her feeling like an outsider. And so she went back to Rockland, Maine, and took a lot of wood from her hometown to build this particular installation. And in many ways, her creating it as a marriage ceremony and a gathering of community was a way to invert her past and invite visitors in to experience her artwork. And Nevelson was one of the first artists to really think about the viewer's participation in her work and feeling a part of things and dissolving that boundary between the artist, the art object, and the viewer.
So we're in this room that has special lighting. Can you tell us a little bit about this space and why it's exhibited this way?
Yes, in 1958, Nevelson pioneered the idea of site-specific installations with her show that she titled Moon Garden +1. She covered a gallery space with her all-black matte wood sculptures and intentionally lit it in blue lights so that visitors would have a completely different experience. And she called it an environment. And she wanted viewers to step out of their typical surroundings and their environment and experience her artwork in a new way, because she was really interested in new ways of seeing and experiencing art.
Do you want to share a little bit about this work in particular that we're standing in front of?
Yes, this is the Carter's lunar landscape, and she created this at the height of the space age, the novel technology of space flight and interest in getting to the moon. And what's fascinating about it is there is everyday objects like a Windsor chair seat here, a bedpost here, an old bowling pin there, but then she's got these almost like machine-looking pristine circles in it. So it's this mixture of the idea of the everyday and an allusion to perhaps the moon or getting to the moon. The idea of maybe the bedpost is perhaps a rocket ship. So she wanted to conjure different associations and ideas from the works that she put together with everyday objects.
The other thing about the exhibition is it focuses on the mid-century, mid-20th century.
Yeah.
So was there something particularly significant about her work during this era?
Yeah, Nevelson, she started working in the 1930s, but didn't receive recognition until the 1950s. And she was so radical at that time in the 1950s because the most popular form of sculpture was welded metal. In fact, sculpture was really considered the domain of men, and there were few, if any, women artists receiving support or recognition. And venturing into it using wood, discarded wood, was completely outside of what anyone else was doing. When you look over Nevelson's lifetime, I mean, she really experiences the difference in a changing America. When she came to the country, a lot of Americans at the turn of the 20th century recycled their goods, were expected to. There wasn't the national trash service that started happening in the 1920s and picking up trash, so individuals were expected to recycle fats and clothing and wood or other materials. And then she lived through the Great Depression and then the war, which was an era of sacrifice, and the salvage drives, where there was this gathering, this salvaging and gathering of rubber and nylon and the whole concept behind it of, you know, donating these materials, metals, you know, to help the war effort, was the idea of the community coming together and bringing soldiers home faster. And then the post-war era was such an economic boom. It was the dawn of mass production and televisions and appliances and people, you know, buying suburban households, and everyone need the latest in dishwashers and those sort of things. But this created new assaults on the ecosystem. And so by taking the wood from the streets, I mean, Nevelson in some ways, as she called herself, was the original recycler. But she took these everyday objects and transformed them. She wanted those everyday experiences, the mundane, but to be transferred into the transcendental experience of art. So she was, as the world outside suggests, I mean, she was very in touch with what was happening in America, the changing economic systems, the changing ecosystem that was coming into play, and the awareness of this. So she was really in touch with what was going on in ways that hasn't been delved into before. This brings together works that have never been shown together before. The Carter's lunar landscape. Nevelson worked in series, so she did another lunar landscape, but it's been in Italy in a collection in Torino for almost 50 years, and that's on view. Also, another unique object is her rainforest wall that she had installed in her major 1967 retrospective at the Whitney Museum of American Art, which was purchased by a European collector and then donated to the Boymans Museum in the Netherlands, and that is on view here. So there's a gathering of objects that have not been seen together before in previous Nevelson exhibitions.
Thanks so much for sharing so much information about Nevelson with us.
Find all of our videos and sign up for our newsletter at artthisweek.com. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and Twitter.